My sister's new boyfriend mocked me at dinner. Everyone laughed. Mum told me to stop making the family look bad. So I let them talk. Until he mentioned his job. Then I pulled out my phone and watched their smiles fade. The thing about being the family disappointment is that you get used to it. Not comfortable with it. Never comfortable. But used to it, the way you get used to a scar that aches when it rains. You learn to smile through the comments, to deflect the barbs with humor, to make yourself smaller so everyone else can feel bigger. You become an expert at swallowing your worth, at folding yourself into corners, at laughing along with jokes that aren't really jokes at all. I learned all of this before I turned 30. My name is Elena. And this is the story of the dinner that changed everything. The dinner where I sat at my mother's table and let my sister's new boyfriend tear me apart while my family watched. The dinner where I was told to stop embarrassing everyone, to just take it, to be grateful I was even invited. The dinner where I finally understood that silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's the most powerful weapon you have. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the weeks before that dinner, so you can understand exactly what was at stake. So you can see how every insult that night was built on years of carefully constructed assumptions. On a foundation of dismissal so solid that no one, not my mother, not my sister, not her smug boyfriend, thought it could ever crack. If you've ever been the one your family underestimates, you already know how this feels. You know the weight of walking into a room and seeing the subtle shift in everyone's posture. The way conversations pause and restart at a different frequency, calibrated for someone they've decided isn't quite on their level. You know what it's like to achieve something real, something hard-won, and have it translated into family mythology as Elena's little thing, or that hobby she does. I was the youngest of 3. My older brother Marcus moved to Singapore 7 years ago for a finance job and rarely came home. Thanksgiving if we were lucky. Maybe Christmas every other year. We were close once, back when we were kids building forts in the backyard, but distance and his 90-hour work weeks had turned him into someone I mostly knew through his polished LinkedIn updates and the occasional text message where he asked how everyone was doing, as if we were a collective unit rather than individual people. Then there was Vivian. Beautiful, charming, successful Vivian who worked in pharmaceutical sales and made 6 figures and had a wardrobe that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. Vivian, who had been my mother's favorite since we were children, though Mum would die before admitting it. Vivian, who had a gift for making everything she did look effortless, including making me feel like I was perpetually failing at a test I didn't know I was taking. And me, Eleanor, the quiet one. Eleanor, who hadn't quite figured her life out. Eleanor, who worked from home doing something with computers, a description my mother had been using for 5 years, despite my attempts to explain what I actually did. Elena, who lived in a small apartment downtown, drove a 7-year-old Honda and apparently existed primarily to serve as a point of comparison that made everyone else's accomplishments shine brighter. The truth was more complex. But truth rarely matters when people have already decided who you are. I'd been working in cybersecurity for 6 years, specializing in penetration testing and security architecture for financial institutions. I held 3 industry certifications that most people in my field would sacrifice their weekends to earn. I'd built a reputation, quietly, steadily, as someone who could find vulnerabilities no one else saw, who could think like both the attacker and defender, who understood not just the technical systems, but the human behaviors that made them weak. But when I tried to explain this to my family, their eyes glazed over. My mother would nod politely and change the subject. Vivian would make a joke about me being a hacker, and everyone would laugh, as if the word itself was ridiculous when applied to me. Even when I worked on projects for major banks, when I traveled to client sites, when my income quietly surpassed what most people my age made, none of it translated into the kind of success my family recognized. Because I didn't dress like Vivian. I didn't drive a luxury car. I didn't post my life on social media in carefully curated squares. I lived modestly, saved aggressively, and invested in a future that didn't require anyone's applause. And in my family's eyes, that made me small. The dinner invitation came on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered via my mother's typical method. A text message that was less invitation and more summons. Family dinner this Sunday at 6. Vivian is bringing her new boyfriend. We'd love for you to be there. The we'd love was pure fiction. A social courtesy that both of us understood was really just, you should show up because you're family, and it would look bad if you didn't. But I'd long since stopped expecting warmth from my mother's invitations. She wasn't cruel exactly. She was just distant, proper. A woman who valued appearances and social standing and the kind of success that looked good when she talked about her children at her book club. I almost declined. I had a project deadline looming, a security audit for a regional bank that was turning out to be more complex than anticipated. But something made me accept. Maybe curiosity about this new boyfriend. Maybe the eternal hope that this time, this dinner would be different. Maybe just the stubborn refusal to let them erase me entirely. I'll be there, I texted back. My mother's response came 30 seconds later. Wonderful. Try to dress nicely. I stared at those 4 words for a long time, feeling that familiar ache in my chest. Try to dress nicely. As if I typically showed up to family dinners in pajamas. As if my quiet, professional style was somehow an embarrassment compared to Vivian's designer outfits. As if everything about me needed to be fixed, polished, improved before I was acceptable enough to sit at her table. I almost texted back something sharp, something that would make her understand how those casual words landed. But I didn't. I never did. Because that was the role I'd learned to play. The accommodating one. The one who absorbed the small cuts without complaint. Who kept the peace by keeping quiet. See you Sunday, I replied instead. The days leading up to the dinner crawled me with the particular slowness of time before an event you're dreading. I threw myself into work, spending long hours in front of my monitors, mapping network vulnerabilities for my client, documenting security gaps, writing reports in the precise clinical language that turned chaos into actionable intelligence. This was where I felt competent, powerful even. Behind my screens, I wasn't the family disappointment. I was the expert they'd hired to protect millions of dollars in assets. I was the person who could trace a potential breach back to its source. Who could think like the criminals trying to infiltrate their systems. Who could build defenses that would hold against sophisticated attacks. But as Sunday approached, that confidence began to fade, replaced by the old familiar anxiety that came with facing my family. I told myself it didn't matter what they thought of me. I told myself I was successful on my own terms, that I didn't need their validation. I told myself a lot of things that felt true in theory, but crumbled the moment I walked through my mother's front door. Sunday arrived with the kind of clear autumn weather that made everything look crisp and perfect, the kind of day that belonged in a lifestyle magazine. I spent too long choosing what to wear, finally settling on dark jeans and a soft grey sweater, nice enough to meet my mother's standards, comfortable enough that I wouldn't spend the entire evening tugging at uncomfortable fabric. I looked at myself in the mirror before I left and saw someone who looked fine. Professional, even. But I knew what my mother would see. Someone who hadn't tried quite hard enough, who didn't quite measure up to Vivian's effortless polish. The drive to my mother's house took 40 minutes, through neighborhoods that got progressively more expensive, houses that got progressively larger, until I pulled up to the colonial-style home where I'd grown up. My mother had done well for herself after my father died. Life insurance, smart investments, and a career in real estate that had positioned her perfectly when the market boomed. The house reflected that success. Pristine landscaping, a circular driveway, the kind of understated elegance that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. Vivian's car was already there, a sleek silver BMW that gleamed in the driveway like a promise of everything I wasn't. And next to it, a black Audi sedan with temporary plates, clearly belonging to the new boyfriend. I sat in my Honda for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, giving myself the pep talk I always gave myself before these dinners. You're here for 2 hours. You can handle 2 hours. Smile, be pleasant. Don't take the bait when they try to make you feel small. Just get through it and go home. Survival mode. That's what I called these dinners. Not connection, not family bonding, just survival. I grabbed the bottle of wine I'd brought, a nice Pinot Noir that had cost more than I wanted to spend but less than Vivian would undoubtedly bring, and walked to the front door. My mother answered before I could knock, as if she'd been watching for me. She looked elegant as always, wearing tailored black pants and a silk blouse, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She was 62, but could easily pass for 50, and she knew it. She worked at her appearance the way some people work at their careers, with dedication and investment and an understanding that presentation mattered. "Elena," she said, her eyes doing a quick scan of my outfit. I saw the microsecond of evaluation, the tiny flicker of something, not quite disappointment, but close. "You made it. I said I would," I replied, offering a smile I didn't feel. I held out the wine. "For dinner." She took it with a gracious nod, the kind of nod that acknowledged the gesture without being particularly impressed by it. "Come in, everyone's in the living room." I followed her through the foyer, past the staircase where Vivian and I had raced as children, past the formal dining room that was only used for holidays, into the spacious living room where my sister sat on the cream-colored sofa next to a man I'd never seen before. Vivian looked stunning naturally. She wore a burgundy wrap dress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Her dark hair falling in perfect waves, her makeup expertly applied. She glowed in the way people glow when they're happy, when they're in love, when everything in their life is aligned exactly as it should be. The man next to her stood when I entered, and I got my first good look at Vivian's new boyfriend. He was handsome in that polished, generic way that certain men are handsome. Tall, fit, with the kind of symmetrical features that look good in photos. He wore chinos and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, the uniform of men who wanted to look casually sophisticated. His smile was white and confident. The smile of someone who'd never been told no, who'd moved through life accumulating wins and assuming they'd keep coming. "You must be Elena, sis," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Derek. Great to finally meet you." His handshake was firm, the kind that was supposed to communicate confidence and reliability. I noticed he held it a beat too long, the way people do when they're trying to establish dominance through a social courtesy. "Nice to meet you too," I said, extracting my hand and moving to greet Vivian. My sister hugged me the way she always did, warmly, genuinely, but with an undercurrent of something else. Pity, maybe, or the kind of affection you give to someone you feel slightly sorry for. "I'm so glad you came," she said. "We have so much to tell you." I settled into the armchair across from the them, while my mother disappeared into the kitchen to check on dinner. The coffee table between us held a cheese board that looked professionally arranged, glasses of wine that hadn't been touched, the staging of a perfect family gathering. "So Derek," I said, trying to start the conversation somewhere safe, "Vivian mentioned you work together." "We met at work," Vivian corrected, reaching over to squeeze Derek's hand. "But Derek's actually in a different department. He's in management." She said this last word with particular emphasis, as if management was a sacred calling. "Operations management," Derek clarified, leaning back into the sofa with the relaxed posture of someone completely comfortable. "I oversee the supply chain and logistics for the Northeast region. Make sure everything runs smoothly, solve problems before they become crises, that kind of thing." "That sounds complex," I offered, which was the polite thing to say. "It can be," he agreed, warming to the topic. "You're basically coordinating between multiple departments, managing relationships with vendors, ensuring compliance with regulations. It's a lot of moving pieces. Takes someone who can see the big picture while also handling the details." There was something in the way he said this. Not quite bragging, but close, the subtle inflation of importance that people do when they want you to be impressed. I'd seen it 1,000 times in client meetings, the way middle managers talked about their roles as if they were running entire companies rather than departments. But I just nodded. "Sounds like you're good at it." "He's being modest," Vivian interjected, looking at Derek with open admiration. "He got promoted twice in the last 2 years. He's the youngest person at his level in the whole company." "That's impressive," I said, meaning it. Career success was still success, even if the delivery was a bit self-satisfied. "What about you?" Derek asked, turning his attention to me with the kind of polite interest people show when they're trying to be courteous. "Vivian mentioned you work from home." And there it was. The question that always led to that conversation. The one where I tried to explain what I did and watched people's interest drain away, like water through a sieve. "I do," I confirmed. "I work in cybersecurity. Penetration testing mostly, for financial institutions." Derek's expression did something interesting. A flicker of surprise quickly covered by a knowing smile. "Oh, so you're in IT?" The way he said IT contained universes of dismissal. IT, that vague catch-all term for anyone who touched computers, the people who reset passwords and fixed printers, the invisible support staff who kept the real work functioning. "Not exactly," I said, keeping my voice even. penetration testing is more about Elena's a hacker. Vivian jumped in, laughing. She tries to break into computer systems to find weaknesses. It's actually pretty cool. Used to do that kind of thing in college, Derek said, nodding as if we were suddenly peers. Helped set up the network for my fraternity house. Pretty basic stuff, but I get the appeal. There's something satisfying about making technology work. I felt something tighten in my chest. The casual dismissal, the reduction of my expertise to something he dabbled in during college, the assumption that what I did was somehow equivalent to setting up a frat house rota. It was the kind of subtle undermining that people probably didn't even realize they were doing. The way they flattened your accomplishments to fit their mental model of who you were. It's a bit more involved than that, I said carefully. I'm usually working with enterprise-level security architecture, trying to identify vulnerabilities before actual attackers can exploit them. The financial sector takes it pretty seriously. Sure, Derek said, waving his hand as if to encompass all possible computer work in one gesture. Security's important. Though honestly, most breaches come from human error, not technical vulnerabilities. That's what I've learned in management. The technology is usually fine. It's the people who mess things up. He said this with the confidence of someone who'd read an article once and now considered himself an expert. I could have told him about the zero-day exploits I'd discovered, about the sophisticated attacks that had nothing to do with human error, about the millions of dollars my work had saved clients. But I didn't, because I already knew how this conversation would go. You're probably right, I said instead, taking the path of least resistance. My mother returned then, announcing that dinner was ready, and we all moved to the dining room. The table was set beautifully, as always. Cloth napkins, her good china, wine glasses that caught the light from the chandelier overhead. A roasted chicken sat in the center, surrounded by roasted vegetables and a salad that looked like it had been composed rather than tossed. We settled into our seats, my mother at the head of the table, Vivian and Derek on one side, me alone on the other, and began the ritual of passing dishes and filling plates. "This looks amazing, Mrs. Hartley," Derek said, loading his plate with practiced enthusiasm. "I'm already jealous that Vivian got to grow up eating like this." My mother beamed. She loved being appreciated, loved having her efforts acknowledged. "I enjoy cooking for family," she said, glancing at all of us. "It's not often I get everyone together anymore." The implicit rebuke in that statement, the suggestion that we didn't make enough effort, that we'd failed to prioritize family, landed exactly where she intended. But before anyone could respond, Vivian launched into the real news. "So we wanted to tell you both something," she said, looking between my mother and me with barely contained excitement. "Derek and I are moving in together." My mother's hand flew to her chest in that gesture of delighted surprise that seemed genuine. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful. When?" "Next month," Derek said, reaching over to take Vivian's hand. "I found a great place in the West End. 2-bedroom, renovated, parking for both cars. It's a bit of a stretch financially, but I think we're ready to take that step." "It's beautiful," Vivian gushed. "Top floor, huge windows, this gorgeous modern kitchen. I can't wait to decorate it." I watched this exchange with the strange detachment of someone watching a play they're not a part of. My mother and sister talked over each other with excitement, discussing furniture and paint colors and housewarming parties. Derek occasionally interjected with details about the lease terms or the neighborhood amenities, playing his part in the narrative of their perfect next chapter. And I sat there, eating my chicken, trying to find something to contribute to this conversation that didn't concern me. "What do you think, Elena?" Vivian asked, suddenly pulling me back into focus. "Isn't this exciting?" "It's great," I said, mustering genuine enthusiasm. "I'm happy for you both." "We'll have to have you over once we're settled," Vivian continued. "You can see the place, maybe help me figure out the tech stuff. Derek wants to set up a whole smart home system. Lights, thermostat, security cameras, all controlled from our phones." "Happy to help," I offered, though I noticed Derek stiffened slightly at the suggestion, as if having me involved in his smart home setup would somehow diminish his technical authority. "Though honestly," Derek said, cutting into his chicken with unnecessary force, "those systems are pretty user-friendly now. I've been researching them, watching some YouTube videos. Should be able to handle the installation myself." "Derek's really good with technology," Vivian said, squeezing his arm. "He set up the whole network at his last apartment." I bit back the response I wanted to give that watching YouTube videos about installing smart home devices was not the same as understanding network security. That DIY installations were often riddled with vulnerabilities. That maybe having someone who actually knew what they were doing take a look wouldn't be the worst idea. But I didn't say any of that, because that would be showing off, or being difficult, or one of the other accusations that got leveled at me when I tried to assert any kind of expertise. "I'm sure you'll do great," I said instead, and took a large sip of wine. The conversation moved on, circling through topics that interested everyone but me. Vivian's upcoming work conference, my mother's latest real estate sale, Derek's insights on supply chain optimization. I contributed where I could, offered the appropriate reactions, played my role as the audience to their more interesting lives. But then, about halfway through dinner, something shifted. Derek had finished his second glass of wine and was reaching for the bottle to pour a third when he turned his attention back to me. There was something different in his eyes now, a sharper focus, the wine having stripped away some of the polite veneer. "So, Elena," he said, swirling the wine in his glass, "Vivian tells me you've been doing this computer thing for a while now. What's that like, working from home all day? Must be pretty isolating." The way he said "computer thing" felt deliberately reductive, but I kept my expression neutral. "It has its pros and cons. I like the flexibility, and honestly, a lot of my work requires focus that's easier to maintain without office distractions." "Don't you get lonely, though?" he pressed. "I mean, I couldn't do it. I need that face-to-face interaction, that energy of being around people. Working in management, you realize how much of success is about relationships, about being visible. Hard to climb the ladder from your living room, you know?" There was something pointed in that observation, a subtle dig about career trajectory, wrapped in concern about my social life. I felt Vivian shift uncomfortably next to him, but she didn't interrupt. "I have client meetings," I said evenly. "And honestly, advancement in my field is more about skill and results than FaceTime. Different industries value different things." Sure, Derek said, waving his fork. "But there's something to be said for the corporate track, right? Benefits, retirement matching, clear promotion paths, that stability, especially as you get older." He said this last part with a sympathetic tilt of his head, as if my lifestyle was a youthful experiment I'd eventually need to abandon for real adult work. I felt my mother's eyes on me, waiting to see how I'd respond. This was familiar territory, the gentle push to reconsider my choices, to aspire to something more conventional, more understandable. My family had been having versions of this conversation with me for years. "The stability is fine," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I've been pretty consistent with clients, and the pay is competitive. It works for me." "What kind of pay are we talking about?" Derek asked, and I saw Vivian touch his arm, a subtle warning that he was crossing a line. But the wine had made him bold, and he was genuinely curious, in the way people are curious about things they assume are less than their own situation. "If you don't mind me asking, I'm just trying to understand the financial model. Are you doing okay?" The question was inappropriate, but it was asked with such apparent concern that refusing to answer would make me look defensive. This was the trap, wrapped in politeness, baited with what looked like genuine interest, designed to put me in a position where any response would reveal more than I wanted to share. "I do fine," I said simply. "What does fine mean, though?" he pushed. "Because I'm looking at it from a management perspective, and I'm trying to figure out the business model. You're working remotely, probably as a contractor, which means no benefits. You're paying both sides of the payroll tax. You've got to cover your own health insurance, retirement. The overhead seems rough." He was showing off now, displaying his business acumen, proving to my mother and Vivian that he was smart, analytical, someone who understood how the world worked. And in doing so, he was dissecting my career in front of my family, reducing it to a questionable financial decision. "The overhead is manageable," I said, my fingers tightening on my fork. "I structure things so it works out." "But what are you actually clearing?" he pressed. "After expenses, taxes, all that?" "Because I'm guessing it's probably in the 40,000–50,000 range. Which is fine for someone young and single, but long-term." He left the thought hanging, the implication clear. My career was cute for now, but ultimately insufficient for a real adult life. Vivian was looking at her plate, her expression uncomfortable. My mother had gone very still, watching this exchange with the focused attention of someone witnessing something they weren't sure how to stop. And I felt something crack inside me. Not break, not yet, just crack. A hairline fracture in the careful control I'd maintained through years of these dinners, these conversations, these subtle and not so subtle dismissals. "Actually," I started, but Derek was already moving on, turning to Vivian with a laugh. "I'm not trying to be rude," he said, though we all knew that's exactly what prefaced something rude. "I just think it's important to be realistic. I mean, we all make choices, right? And some choices position you better for the future than others. That's just basic economics." "Derek," Vivian said quietly, gentle reprimand that he ignored. "No, I'm serious," he continued, gesturing with his wineglass. "Take me and Elena, for example. We're probably about the same age, right? Early 30s? "I'm 31, I said quietly. "Okay, perfect. So I'm 33. In the last 6 years, I've moved up from a logistics coordinator to a regional operations manager. I've more than doubled my salary. I've got full benefits. I'm maxing out my 401k with company match. I've got stock options. Meanwhile," he paused, taking a sip of wine. "Meanwhile, Elena's been doing the same thing for 6 years. Working from home, doing IT support or whatever. Where's the growth there? Where's the trajectory? The room had gone completely quiet. Even the soft background music my mother had playing seemed to have faded, leaving only Derek's voice, casual and certain, explaining to everyone why my life was insufficient. "Derek, that's enough," Vivian said, but her voice lacked conviction. She was embarrassed, but not enough to truly shut him down. "I'm just saying," Derek continued, warming to his theme. "There's something to be said for traditional career progression, for putting yourself in environments where you can advance. I mean, what's Elena's 5-year plan? Is she still going to be in her apartment, doing the same remote IT work? At some point, doesn't that just become—" He searched for the word. "Stagnant?" My mother cleared her throat, a sound that usually signaled she was about to change the subject. But Derek wasn't finished. "And I say this with love," he added, looking at me with what he probably thought was kindness. "Because you're family now, or you will be, once Vivian and I take that next step." He squeezed Vivian's hand meaningfully. "And family looks out for each other, right? So I'm just being honest. Maybe it's time to consider a pivot. Get into a real company. Start building towards something bigger. I could probably help with that, actually. We're always hiring in operations. Entry-level positions, sure, but it's a foot in the door. Better than spinning your wheels doing freelance computer stuff." Entry-level positions. Those 3 words hung in the air like a slap. He was offering me, with 6 years of specialized experience, with certifications and skills, and a client roster that included major financial institutions, entry-level positions in his logistics department. And he thought he was being generous. I looked at my sister, hoping to see some recognition of how insulting this was. But Vivian was looking at Derek with something like admiration, as if his willingness to help her poor struggling sister was just another example of his big heart. I looked at my mother, hoping for— I don't know what. Defense? Redirection? Some acknowledgement that this had gone too far. But my mother's expression was carefully neutral, the look of someone trying not to take sides, which of course was its own kind of choice. "That's really kind of you," I managed, my voice barely audible. "Hey, what are families for?" Derek said, raising his glass in a small toast. "We help each other out." I needed to leave. I needed to stand up, make some excuse about an early morning or a headache or anything, and get out of this house before the crack inside me spread into something irreparable. But before I could formulate an exit strategy, Derek shifted the conversation again. "You know what's funny?" he said, spearing a piece of chicken. "Today at work, we had this whole situation with our IT department. The network went down for like 3 hours. Complete chaos. And these guys are supposed to be professionals, right? But they couldn't figure out what was wrong. Turned out to be some router configuration issue or something." I'm standing there watching them run around like chickens with their heads cut off, and I'm thinking, this is what people go to school for. He laughed, and Vivian laughed with him, and even my mother smiled. "I mean, I'm sure Elena's better than those guys," Derek continued, gesturing toward me with his fork. "But it just made me think about the whole tech industry. Everyone acts like it's so complex, so specialized. But really, it's just troubleshooting. It's following logical steps. I could probably do most of those jobs with a weekend of training. I felt something hot and sharp rise in my throat. This wasn't just dismissive anymore. This was active contempt. This was someone who knew nothing about my field, nothing about what I did, confidently explaining that anyone could do it, that I wasn't special, wasn't skilled, wasn't valuable. And my family was sitting there, letting him say it. I think there's probably more to it than that, I said. And my voice came out harder than I intended. Derek looked at me with surprise, as if he'd forgotten I was capable of disagreement. I'm not saying it's not important. He backtracked, but only slightly. I'm just saying it's not rocket science. It's computers. They work a certain way, and you figure out how they work. That's not the same as, say, managing complex supply chains across multiple states, coordinating hundreds of people, balancing competing priorities. Different skill sets, I said tightly. Sure, but one has more impact, right? Derek pressed. One is directly tied to a company's bottom line, keeping products moving, ensuring customer satisfaction. The other is just a maintenance. Keeping things running. Important, but not exactly strategic. I thought about the security breach I'd prevented 3 months ago. How I'd caught a sophisticated phishing attempt that had already compromised 2 employee accounts and was working its way toward the financial department. I thought about the detailed report I'd written, the vulnerability assessments, the recommendations that had fundamentally changed my client's security posture. I thought about the email from the CEO thanking me personally, saying I'd potentially save them millions in theft and regulatory penalties. That was maintenance. That was just keeping things running. Elena, are you okay? My mother asked, and I realized my face must have shown something I'd been trying to hide. I'm fine, I said, automatically. You look upset, Vivian observed. Derek didn't mean anything by it. He's just talking. I know, I said. It's fine. See, this is what I mean, Derek said, leaning back in his chair with the satisfied look of someone who thought they'd just proven a point. Sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, but that doesn't make it less true. I'm trying to help here, to give Elena some perspective. She's stuck in this rut, and sometimes you need someone from outside to point that out. I don't think Elena's in a rut, my mother said, but her voice was uncertain, as if she was questioning her own defense, even as she offered it. Mum, it's okay, I said quickly, not wanting her to continue a battle she clearly didn't want to fight. Derek's entitled to his opinion. Exactly, Derek said, raising his glass again. And my opinion is that Elena's got potential. She's smart. She's capable. She just needs to get out of her own way. Stop hiding behind a computer screen and get into the real world. That's where the opportunities are. Hiding behind a computer screen. That's what my expertise was to him. Hiding. I looked down at my plate, at the food I could no longer stomach eating, and I made a decision. Not to fight back. Not yet. But to stop absorbing. To stop letting these words land and embed themselves like glass shards in my chest. You know what? I said, setting down my fork carefully. I think I need to use the restroom. Excuse me. I stood up before anyone could respond, walked out of the dining room with measured steps, and made it to the bathroom down the hall before the trembling started. I stood there, hands gripping the edge of the sink, looking at myself in the mirror. My face was flushed, my eyes too bright. my expression somewhere between fury and heartbreak. I'd come to this dinner expecting the usual subtle dismissals, the casual underestimation. I hadn't expected this systematic dismantling, this public evaluation that found me lacking in every possible way. And the worst part, the part that made my hands shake and my throat tight, was that my family had let it happen, had participated in it in their way, had sat there and listened to this man, this stranger who'd been dating my sister for all of 3 months, explain in detail why my life was a failure. I ran cold water over my hands, pressed them to my cheeks, tried to calm the storm building inside me. I needed to go back out there, finish dinner, get through the rest of the evening. That's what I'd always done. Survive by an escape. But something was different this time. That crack I'd felt earlier was spreading, creating a space where something new could grow. Something that felt dangerously like anger. Not the hot, explosive kind, but the cold, clear kind. The kind that sees exactly what's happening and decides, finally, that enough is enough. I dried my hands slowly, methodically. I straightened my sweater. I looked at myself one more time in the mirror. And I saw someone who'd spent 31 years making herself smaller, quieter, less threatening. Someone who'd let her family underestimate her because it was easier than fighting for their respect. Someone who was done with all of that. When I walked back into the dining room, everyone looked up with varying expressions of concern and discomfort. Derek had the grace to look slightly abashed, as if he'd realized during my absence that maybe he'd gone too far. "Elena, honey, are you all right?" my mother asked. "I'm fine," I said. And I settled back into my seat with a calmness that surprised me. "Sorry about that. Please continue." "We were just talking about the new place," Vivian said quickly, eager to move past the awkward moment. Derek was telling Mom about the neighborhood. And just like that, they were off again. The conversation flowing back to comfortable topics, the tension dissipating. They'd already forgotten the last 15 minutes. Or at least, they'd decided to pretend they had. That's how it worked in families like mine. Discomfort got smoothed over, buried under pleasant conversation, never actually addressed. I let them talk. I ate a few more bites of food, drank some water, played the role of attentive listener, and I waited. Because Derek wasn't done. I could feel it. He'd gotten comfortable now, found his rhythm, settled into the role of the successful man offering wisdom to those less fortunate. And men like that always had more to say. It didn't take long. "The real trick to career success," Derek said, helping himself to seconds, "is understanding systems. Understanding how organizations work, where the power is, how to position yourself. That's what they don't teach you in school. That success isn't about being the best at one specific thing. It's about being good at navigating the bigger picture." "That makes sense," my mother said, clearly relieved to be back on safer conversational ground. "And that's what I try to tell younger people in my department," Derek continued. "Don't get too specialized. Don't become one of those people who's really good at one narrow thing, but can't see beyond it. Stay flexible. Keep your options open. That's how you build a real career." He wasn't looking at me when he said this, but we all knew who the message was for. The person who'd gotten too specialized, who'd trapped herself in a narrow technical field instead of taking the wide, flexible path to success. "Although," Derek said, and I heard the shift in his tone that meant he was building towards something. I have to admit, I've always been fascinated by what makes some people successful and others just not. Take Elena, for example. Oh God, here we go. You're clearly smart, he said, looking at me now. You must be to do what you do. But smart isn't enough, right? The world is full of smart people working jobs that don't really matter. What's missing is ambition, drive, the willingness to put yourself out there. Derek. Vivian tried, but he waved her off. No, I'm being serious. This is constructive. Elena, when's the last time you pushed yourself? When's the last time you took a real risk? Went after something big? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've built a comfortable little corner for yourself. Safe, predictable, low stakes. And that's fine if that's all you want. But don't expect people to take you seriously if you're not willing to play in the big leagues. The big leagues. As if my work protecting financial institutions from sophisticated cyber attacks was little leagues. As if preventing actual crimes, actual theft, actual harm was somehow less important than making sure pharmaceutical supplies got from point A to point B. What would you consider the big leagues? I asked, and my voice was quiet but steady. Derek brightened, clearly pleased that I was engaging. Working for a Fortune 500 company, leading teams, having direct reports, making decisions that impact thousands of people, building something that matters. And how many people do you have reporting to you? I asked. I have 11 direct reports, he said proudly, and those 11 manage another 48 people across the region. So I'm effectively responsible for nearly 60 people's work. That's significant. That is significant, I agreed. He smiled, satisfied, and reached for his wine glass. See, I knew you'd understand. You seem like someone who can appreciate what real success looks like, even if it's not your path. There it was again. That casual, cruel assumption that whatever he had, whatever he'd achieved, was inherently more valuable than anything I could claim. Can I ask you something? I said, and there was something in my tone that made everyone at the table go still. Sure, Derek said, still smiling. You mentioned you work in supply chain and logistics, right? Operations management. That's right. For a pharmaceutical company? One of the largest in the Northeast, he confirmed. What's your company's name? He told me, and something clicked into place in my mind. A connection forming that made everything suddenly perfectly clear. And you managed the supply chain for the whole Northeast region? I pressed. That's what I said. He was getting slightly defensive now, perhaps sensing that these questions were leading somewhere he wasn't going to like. So you'd be responsible for ensuring secure data transmission between distribution centers, managing the IT infrastructure for inventory tracking, overseeing the cybersecurity protocols for supply chain management systems? Derek's smile was starting to fade. Well, I don't directly manage all that. We have an IT department that handles the technical side. I focus on the operational aspects. But you'd be aware if there were security issues. If someone, say, ran a penetration test on your systems and found vulnerabilities. The room had gone completely silent. Vivian was staring at me. My mother had set down her fork, and Derek's face had lost some of its color. What are you getting at? He asked. I pulled out my phone, slowly, deliberately, and giving him time to understand that something had shifted. You said your company is one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the Northeast, right? And you've been working there for 6 years. Yes, he said cautiously. I pulled up my email, found what I was looking for, and set my phone on the table between us. Because I'm looking at an email from 3 months ago, from your company's Chief Information Security Officer, thanking me for the comprehensive security audit I performed on your supply chain management systems. Derek's face went from pale to red. I found 17 critical vulnerabilities. I continued, my voice still quiet, still calm. Including one in your inventory tracking system that would have allowed a bad actor to intercept shipments, redirect medications, and potentially access patient data through your distribution network. The CISO estimated that the vulnerabilities I found could have resulted in tens of millions of dollars in theft, regulatory fines, and lawsuits. I scrolled through the email, watching Derek's eyes track the screen. He also mentioned that none of the internal team had caught these issues. That it took an outside specialist, that's me, to identify the systematic weaknesses in your security architecture. He called my work potentially company-saving. Those are his words, not mine. I looked up at Derek, who was now staring at my phone like it was a bomb. Now, I'm not saying you should have known about any of this, I said. You're in operations, not IT. You focus on the big picture, on managing people, on all those important strategic things you were telling me about. But here's what's interesting. I pulled up another document on my phone, a copy of the invoice that I always kept saved because it was one of my biggest contracts. They paid me $180,000 for that security audit, plus expenses for 6 weeks of work. The number hung in the air like a revelation, like a bomb, like the truth it was. My mother made a small sound. Vivian's mouth had actually fallen open, and Derek looked like he'd been physically struck. Now, that was an unusual contract. I continued, my voice still that same calm, measured tone. Usually, I charge between $150 to $300 per hour, depending on the complexity of the work. I typically work about 40 billable hours a week, 50 weeks a year. You can do the math if you want. I paused, letting that information settle. The silence was absolute. So when you talked about me making $40,000 or $50,000 a year, you were off by about $200,000. When you talked about entry-level positions and getting my foot in the door, I make more than your entire management team combined, Derek. When you talked about me being stagnant, working from my apartment, hiding behind a computer screen, I'm literally the person your executives call when they need to protect the company from catastrophic security breaches. Derek's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. And that comment about IT being simple, about how anyone could do it with a weekend of training? That router configuration issue that took your IT department 3 hours to fix? I could have diagnosed and solved it in 20 minutes. But you're right, it's not rocket science. It's just a completely different field that requires years of training, multiple certifications, constant learning to keep up with evolving threats, and a level of technical expertise that most people don't have and can't fake. I picked up my phone, closed the emails, and slipped it back into my pocket. Now, about that career advice, I said, looking directly at Derek. I appreciate the concern, I really do, but I'm doing just fine in my comfortable little corner. I own my apartment, paid cash 2 years ago. I've got more in retirement savings than most people my age will see in their lifetime. I work with clients who respect my expertise and pay me accordingly. And I do all of this while maintaining the flexibility to work when and where I want, on projects that actually interest me. I turned to my mother and Vivian, who were both staring at me like I'd suddenly revealed I was a different person entirely. I know I don't talk about work much, I said, softer now. I know it's hard to understand what I do, and I know it doesn't look impressive from the outside. No fancy office, no business cards, no corporate title. Just me and my computers in my small apartment. But that small apartment, I own it. That modest car, paid off. That stagnant career. It's given me more financial security and professional satisfaction than most people ever achieve. Elena, my mother started, but I shook my head. I'm not angry, I said, and I realized it was true. The fury had burned through, leaving behind something clearer, cooler. I'm just tired. Tired of being underestimated. Tired of coming to these dinners and being treated like the family disappointment when I'm doing better than any of us. Tired of staying quiet because it's easier than making everyone uncomfortable. I stood up, pushed my chair back carefully. Thank you for dinner, Mum. It was lovely, as always. Vivian, Derek, congratulations on the new place. I hope it all works out. Wait, Vivian said, finding her voice. Eleanor, don't leave like this. I'm not upset, I assured her. And I meant it. I just think I've had enough family time for tonight. Maybe for a while. I walked toward the door, and no one tried to stop me. In the hallway, I grabbed my jacket, my keys, my bag. And as I reached for the door handle, I heard Derek's voice from the dining room, small and stunned. She owns her apartment? I smiled, just a little, walked out into the cool autumn night. The next few weeks were strange, quiet. I half expected phone calls from my mother, demanding an explanation, from Vivian, trying to smooth things over, even from Derek, attempting an apology. But my phone stayed silent. I went back to work, to my projects, to the comfortable rhythm of my days. I had a video call with a potential new client, walked them through my process, answered their questions about my qualifications. When they asked for references, I gave them my contact at Derek's pharmaceutical company, along with 2 others. They called back 3 days later with a contract offer. I spent my evenings reading, watching old movies, cooking meals that I actually enjoyed instead of forcing myself to eat through family tension. I went for walks in the park near my apartment, watching the leaves turn brilliant colors before falling. I met with friends, real friends, people who'd chosen to know me rather than being obligated by genetics, and told them about the dinner. They were appropriately outraged on my behalf, which was satisfying. But mostly, I just lived my life. The life I'd built carefully, deliberately, despite my family's inability to see its value. The first contact came 3 weeks after the dinner. A text message from Vivian. Hey, can we talk? I stared at it for a long time before responding. Sure. Call me when you're free. She called that evening, and we talked for nearly 2 hours. She apologized, not for Derek's behavior, which I found telling, but for not shutting him down sooner. She'd been embarrassed, she said, shocked. She'd had no idea about my work, my income, any of it. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" she asked, and there was genuine hurt in her voice. "I tried," I said simply, "for years. But every time I explained what I did, everyone's eyes glazed over. It was easier to just not. But you let us think. I didn't let you think anything," I interrupted gently. "You all made assumptions about my apartment, my car, my lifestyle. You saw what you wanted to see. I was the family disappointment, and that role was easier for everyone than the reality." "That's not fair," Vivian protested. "Isn't it?" I asked. "When's the last time you asked me a real question about my work? When's the last time Mum did? When's the last time any of you treated what I do as if it mattered?" She was quiet for a long time. "We care about you, Elena." "I know you do," I said. "I just don't think you respect me, and I'm not sure you ever will." We ended the call on awkward terms, with promises to talk again soon that we both knew were half-hearted. My mother called a week after that. Her approach was different, more direct, tinged with guilt. "I didn't realize," she said, "about your success, about how well you're doing." "I know," I said, "but you should have told us. We're your family. We should know these things." "Mom, I tried to tell you, 12 times, but it was easier for you to worry about me, to see me as struggling, than to actually understand what I do." "That's not true." "It is true, and that's okay. I don't need you to understand my career, but I also don't need to keep showing up to dinners where I'm treated like a failure, where people like Derek can sit there and dissect my life choices while everyone nods along." "Derek feels terrible," she said. "Vivian says he's been mortified ever since. He had no idea who you were." "Who I am," I corrected, "not who I was." "Present tense, Mom. This is who I am. This has been who I am for years." She sighed. "When will I see you again?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "I need some space. I need to figure out what kind of relationship we can have when it's not built on you being disappointed in me." "I was never disappointed." "You were," I said gently. "You've been disappointed since I chose my own path instead of the one you wanted for me. Since I didn't become whatever version of successful made sense to you. And that's okay. But I can't keep carrying that disappointment while also trying to be happy." We ended that call with more distance between us than when we'd started, but also with more honesty. I felt the relief of it, the strange peace that comes from finally saying true things out loud. 2 months after the dinner, I got an email from Derek. It was long, carefully written, clearly the product of multiple drafts. He apologized for his behavior, his assumptions, his rudeness. He explained that he'd been trying to impress my mother and Vivian, trying to establish himself as the kind of man who had answers, who could offer guidance. He'd made assumptions based on surface-level observations and had convinced himself he was helping. The email ended with a request. "If you're ever willing to talk to me about what you do, I'd like to learn." I realize now how little I actually understand about cybersecurity and how arrogant I was about the complexity of the field. I'm sorry for diminishing your work and expertise. You were right. I had no idea what I was talking about. I appreciated the apology. I did. But I also recognized it for what it was. The regret of someone who'd been caught being small rather than the genuine understanding of why his behavior was wrong. He was sorry he'd looked bad, sorry he'd been wrong about my circumstances. But I wasn't sure he understood why his dismissiveness had hurt, or why it mattered beyond the embarrassment of being corrected. I wrote back a brief response. I appreciate the apology. I hope you and Vivian are happy in your new place. Cordial, distant, final. Because here's what I'd learned from that dinner, from the weeks of silence and awkward conversations that followed. My family loved me, in their way, but they loved a version of the me that had never really existed. The struggling younger sister, the one who needed help, the one who justified their own successes by comparison. They loved me best when I was smallest. And I was done being small. 6 months after the dinner, I got a call from my brother Marcus. We'd barely talked since it happened. He'd heard about it from my mother, had sent me a brief text of support, but had largely stayed out of the family drama like he always did. I'm coming home for Christmas, he said. Mom wants the whole family together. She says you won't come if it's just her and Vivian and Derek. That's true, I confirmed. Will you come if I'm there? He asked. I thought about it. Maybe, if I can bring someone. A boyfriend? He asked, sounding surprised. A friend, I clarified. Sarah. She works in my field. She gets it. Someone in my corner. That's fine, Marcus said. Mum won't mind. I'm not asking permission, I told him gently. I'm telling you my terms. Those are the boundaries for my attendance. There was a pause. Then, when did you get so tough? I've always been tough, I said. You just didn't notice because I wasn't tough in ways that looked tough to you. He laughed, surprised and, fair enough. Yeah? Bring Sarah. I want to meet this version of you everyone's been telling me about. This has always been the version of the me, I said. You just finally have permission to see it. Christmas came with snow and strings of lights and the kind of festive anticipation that always felt slightly performative in my family. I drove to my mother's house with Sarah beside me. Brilliant, funny Sarah, who'd worked in cybersecurity for a decade and understood exactly what I'd been dealing with. Are you nervous? She asked as we pulled into the driveway. Surprisingly, no, I said. And it was true. I wasn't nervous because I wasn't hoping for anything anymore. I wasn't walking into this dinner carrying the weight of wanting their approval, their understanding, their validation. I was walking in at myself, fully myself, with someone who already saw me clearly. My mother answered the door, and her eyes went immediately to Sarah with the kind of evaluative look she usually reserved for real estate properties. You must be Sarah, she said, managing a smile. Come in, both of you. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and roasting meat. Marcus was there, looking slightly jet-lagged, but genuinely happy to see me. He hugged me hard, whispering, "Proud of you," in my ear before pulling back. Vivian and Derek were in the living room, and the atmosphere grew noticeably tense when we entered. Derek stood immediately, his expression caught between remorse and uncertainty. Elena, he said, thank you for coming. Derek, I replied, cordial but not warm. How's the new place? It's good, he said, really good. Actually, we had some questions about the security system and I was hoping maybe you'd have time to. I can recommend some good consultants, I said smoothly, cutting off what was clearly going to be a request for free advice. Happy to send you some names. His face reddened, but he nodded. Right. Of course. Thank you. Vivian hugged me carefully, the way you hug someone you're no longer sure how to be around. I'm glad you came, she said. Me too, I said, and meant it. I was glad. Not because I expected anything to change, but because I'd proven to myself that I could show up on my own terms. Dinner was less fraught than I'd feared. Marcus kept the conversation moving, asking Sarah about her work, genuinely interested in the technical details. My mother was on her best behavior, careful not to say anything that might trigger another scene. Vivian and Derek were quiet, participating but not dominating. And I was fine. Better than fine. I talked about my work when asked, but didn't feel the need to prove anything. I was friendly without being invested. I was present without being vulnerable. At one point, Sarah told a story about a security conference where she'd given a presentation on ransomware defense. Elena was there too, Shia said. She called out a major flaw in my logic during the Q&A, completely politely, and she was absolutely right. I went back and retested everything and had to revise the whole approach. You were nice about being right, I did, smiling at her. That's a rare skill, Marcus observed, looking at me with something like approval. Not for Elena, Sarah said. She's always nice about being right. Even when people really deserve to be made to feel stupid. She didn't look at Derek when she said this, but everyone heard the implication. After dinner, as we were getting ready to leave, my mother pulled me aside. I'm trying, she said quietly, to understand, to see you the way you are instead of the way I thought you were. It's harder than you'd think, changing your mind about someone you've known their whole life. I know, I said. I'm not asking you to change overnight. I'm just asking you to stop treating me like I'm less than I am. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I can do that. I want to do that. Then that's enough, I said. As Sarah and I drove home through the snowy streets, she turned to me with a grin. That was way less dramatic than I expected. Disappointed? I asked. Relieved? She said. Though I was fully prepared to defend your honor if necessary. I appreciate that, I said, but I think I've got it covered now. Yeah, she agreed. You definitely do. The thing about being underestimated is that it gives you a kind of freedom. When people don't expect much from you, you can build something remarkable in the shadows, unobserved and unscrutinized. You can become powerful without anyone noticing until the moment you choose to reveal yourself. And the thing about that dinner, that terrible, excruciating, ultimately transformative dinner, is that it forced me to stop hiding. Not from my family, but from myself. It made me confront the fact that I'd been complicit in my own diminishment, that I'd made myself small because it was easier than demanding to be seen. I don't go to family dinners much anymore. Maybe 3 or 4 times a year, for major holidays or occasions. And when I do go, I go on my own terms. I don't need their approval anymore. I don't need them to understand my work or be impressed by my achievements. I don't need them to see me the way I see myself, because I see myself clearly now. And that's enough. My career has continued to grow. I've taken on bigger contracts, more complex projects, clients who seek me out specifically because of my reputation. I've spoken at conferences, written papers that other professionals cite, built a name for myself in a field where names matter. But more importantly, I've built a life that's mine, shaped by my choices, aligned with my values. A life where success isn't measured by what impresses other people, but by what satisfies me. And sometimes, late at night, I think about that dinner. I think about Derek's face when he saw those emails, when he understood exactly how wrong he'd been. I think about my mother's silence, about Vivian's shock, about the way everything shifted in that single moment. I don't take pleasure in their embarrassment. I'm not vindictive like that, but I do take satisfaction in the truth, in the way truth cuts through assumption, in the way facts dismantle dismissal, in the way quietly accumulated evidence can speak louder than any defense. If you've ever been underestimated, you know what I mean. You know that feeling when people finally see you clearly, really see you, not the version they'd invented, and have to recalibrate everything they thought they knew. It's not quite revenge, though it feels adjacent to it. It's more like justice. It's the universe balancing itself out, correcting a long-running error. I didn't set out to prove anything to my family. I set out to build a life that worked for me, that used my skills, that gave me purpose and security and satisfaction. The proving happened as a byproduct, almost accidentally. In the moment when someone pushed too hard and I finally pushed back. But here's what I've learned. You can't make people see you. You can't argue or explain or demonstrate your way into someone's respect if they're determined not to give it. The only thing you can do is know your own worth. Live according to that knowledge and let the evidence speak for itself when the moment comes. And that moment will come. Maybe not as dramatically as mine did, maybe not over a family dinner with a smug boyfriend as the catalyst, but it will come. The moment when you're finally tired enough of being small, brave enough to be big, ready enough to let people see what you've been all along. When that moment comes for you, I hope you're ready. I hope you've saved the emails, kept the receipts, documented the wins. I hope you've built something solid enough that you don't need to argue for its validity. I hope you've learned what I learned that night. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let people think they know you. Let them make their assumptions. Let them feel superior in their ignorance. And then, when the moment is right, when the question is asked or the claim is made, you can quietly pull out your phone, show them the truth, and watch their smiles fade. Not because you need to humble them, not because you're trying to prove anything, but because you finally understand that their opinion was never the point. Your reality was always enough, whether they acknowledged it or not. I am Elena. I work in cybersecurity. I protect financial institutions from sophisticated attacks. I make more money than most people in my family. I own my apartment, drive a paid-off car, have more in savings than my retirement-age mother. I'm good at what I do, really exceptionally good, in ways that most people can't see and don't understand. And I don't need you to understand it anymore. I just need you to stop telling me I'm failing when I'm not. To stop offering me entry-level positions when I'm already at the top of my field. To stop explaining my industry to me like I'm a novice who needs your wisdom. I need you to sit with your assumptions, examine them, and recognize how little they reflect reality. I need you to understand that the quiet person at the family dinner might be protecting systems you rely on every day, might be preventing catastrophes you'll never know about, might be doing work that's literally saving companies from collapse. And I need you to remember this. The next time you're sitting at dinner, feeling superior to the person across from you, making jokes about their work or their choices or their life, pause for a moment. Consider that you might not know the whole story. Consider that their quiet demeanor might hide capabilities you can't imagine. Consider that the small life you're dismissing might be bigger than yours in ways you'll never see unless they choose to show you. And consider that one day, they might pull out their phone and show you exactly how wrong you were. And on that day, you'll have to decide what kind of person you want to be. Someone who apologizes and grows, or someone who doubles down and shrinks. Derek chose to apologize. My family chose to recalibrate, awkwardly and slowly, but genuinely. And I chose to forgive. Not because they deserved it, but because I deserved the peace that came with letting go. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean returning to the old dynamic, accepting the old assumptions. It means moving forward with clear eyes and firm boundaries, with the understanding that respect isn't something you can demand. It's something you stop accepting the absence of. That's the real power play, not the dramatic reveal, though that was satisfying. The real power is in knowing your worth so completely that you don't need anyone else to confirm it. In building a life so solid that external opinions can't shake its foundation. In being so certain of who you are that you can sit through a dinner full of dismissal and know with absolute clarity that they're wrong. I had to go through that dinner to learn that lesson. I had to sit there and listen to Derek explain why my life was insufficient, watch my family nod along, feel that familiar ache of being underestimated. I had to reach the breaking point before I could break through to something better. But now I'm here, on the other side of that dinner, 6 months later, living a life that's mine. Not defending it anymore, not explaining it, just living it. Taking contracts that excite me, working with clients who value my expertise, saving money, investing wisely, planning a future that doesn't require anyone's approval. And when I see my family now, it's different. There's more distance, but also more honesty. There's less hope for the kind of closeness I once wanted, but also less pain from its absence. There's acceptance, on both sides, that we're not going to be the family that really understands each other. But we can be the family that respects each other's differences. That's enough. It has to be enough. Because the alternative is continuing to make myself small, continuing to absorb their assumptions, continuing to show up to dinners where I'm the punchline. And I'm done being small. I'm done with that version of myself who swallowed insults and smiled through dismissal and let people explain her own life to her. I'm done watching my smiles fade while theirs grow. Now, when I pull out my phone, it's their smiles that fade. It's their assumptions that crumble. It's their comfortable superiority that collapses under the weight of truth. And that feeling of knowing who you are so completely that no one can take it away, that's the real revenge. That's the quiet power play. That's the ending I get to write every day by simply living my life with my eyes wide open and my worth clearly seen. If you're reading this and you're the one being underestimated, the one sitting at the dinner table while everyone laughs at your expense, The one whose family doesn't understand your success because it doesn't look like their definition of success. I see you. I know you. I was you. And I'm telling you, document everything. Know your worth. Build your evidence. And when the moment comes, and it will come, be ready to quietly, calmly show them exactly how wrong they were. Not because you need their validation, but because sometimes the truth just needs to be told. And sometimes the people who've been making you small need to understand that you were always bigger than they could see. You don't owe them small. You never did. So stop shrinking. Stop explaining. Stop defending. Just be. Fully, completely, unapologetically be. And let them deal with their own surprise when they finally see what was there all along. That's your power. That's your revenge. That's your truth. And it's enough. You are enough. You always were.